It's Monday, November 6th, 2023. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Documenting Congress Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Joining me here today at Denton's in Washington, D.C. is Robin Reeder. Ms. Reeder earned her BA in Art History and Historic Preservation from what was then Mary Washington College, and her MLS from the University of Maryland College Park. From 2001 until her retirement in 2019, she served as an archivist at the U.S. House of Representatives. Prior to that, she was assistant curator of manuscripts at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center at Howard University. She also worked as an archivist for History Associates Incorporated and as an archives technician at the National Gallery of Art. She's currently the founder and proprietor of the Alexandria-based Reader Transcription Services. Thank you, Robin. Finally, it's so great to finally meet you in person after many years of conversing over email.
Absolutely.
Going back and forth. And before I forget, I'd also like to thank Randy Knuckles and everybody here at Denton's Washington, D.C. office for playing host to us once again. Thank you for their generosity. So I guess let's start at the beginning. Tell me about your childhood and upbringing. What made Robin Robin?
Well, I was born in Lawton, Oklahoma, at Fort Sill Army Base on March 5th, 1964. And my father was in the Army, and we traveled around a lot growing up. We lived in Oklahoma only for 6 months, so I don't remember any of it. Lived in Colorado, Kansas, New Jersey, this area a couple of times, Germany, and Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And I went to school pretty close to home. Fredericksburg's only an hour away, so
okay.
I was pretty fortunate. But yeah, I have an older sister, 5 years older. I was pretty lucky because once we got back here, I went to the same secondary school for 7th through 12th grade, and my poor sister had to switch high schools 3 times when we were moving around. So, yeah.
So what do you think gave you that early spark, your interest in history and art and things like that? The sort of where your toehold into our business, our industry, so to speak.
Sure. Well, I can blame a little of it on my mother because she used to drag us to museums all the time growing up, and I don't know if I was a real big fan then, but it obviously had some effect in that I wanted to pursue that.
Right.
When I was going to college, I really just wanted to focus on historic house museums. That was really my goal, was to be like a curator in a historic house museum. And I had a class in archives in college, and it was horrible. It was very boring.
As an undergrad?
As an undergrad,
oh, wow.
Yeah. We the historic preservation had 4 courses that you had to take. It was museums, archaeology, archives, and architecture.
Okay.
And so the class was actually taught by the state archivist of Virginia, who I think is probably, I won't say his name, but I think he's probably way gone. And he was not very exciting. It was very boring. And I said, I never, ever want to do this for a living. When I was in college, I did a few internships at the National Gallery in the press office. And when I graduated, the woman that I worked with let me know about a temporary position that opened up in the newly formed archives of the National Gallery. And I thought, well, it was a temporary position. You know, I'll go there for a few months and see what's what.
Tale as old as time.
Absolutely. But my first boss, Mae Jean Daniels, was wonderful, and she really is the one that made me love archives and see it in a different way. And I worked there for 5 years.
So when you were at the National Gallery, was your boss the one who encouraged you to go and get your MLS, or was that something you sort of did on your own, of your own volition?
I think it was a combination.
Yeah.
I think it was a combination. I think she knew that I really took to it, and knew that if I wanted to go any further, I really had to have a master's.
So you tell me what it was like doing graduate school in College Park, working here. I assume you took a lot of you took the metro.
Well, I did a lot of driving actually, because this was back in the late '80s, and Metro didn't go to College Park, and so I did a lot of
showing my age.
I did a lot of driving. I lived in Alexandria then, actually, in a different place. But I lived in Alexandria. I worked in D.C. and I went to College Park. I did that for 3 years. I don't know how, but. Certainly,
you had to, I guess.
I guess. I had a lot more energy then, being younger.
Preach. Well, tell me, what was the nature of your work in the National Gallery? Because my only experience has been manuscripts, and especially political papers and congressional papers. So what was archives like in a place like National Gallery?
Well, it was institutional records of the gallery.
Okay.
So they, and while I was there, they had their 50th anniversary, so they were doing some exhibitions. They had there was an architectural archivist they had all the drawings for both buildings, both the West Building and then the IMP East Building, as well as organizational records on exhibitions and different departments. It was kind of a combination of a special collections and an institutional archives, because they were actively working with the departments to send their records to the archives. But they also had quite a trove of wonderful special collections. And actually, Ann Ritchie worked there at the time, and she was the oral.
Yeah, that's right.
She was the oral historian there when we overlapped some. Yeah.
I met Ann when I interviewed Don for this project, and we were all talking shop about oral history. It's like doing oral histories with oral historians around. It's a different experience. It's a different experience. It's a good one. It's just different. So. Your first job post MLS was at Howard University, right?
Well, there was an 8-month stint where I worked at the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Okay.
And it wasn't the most pleasant experience.
Okay.
So I worked there for 8 months, and
in an archival role, or
okay, in an archival role.
Decided it wasn't for you.
Decided it wasn't for me. I left, and for about a year I was temping and waitressing, and but trying to still get a job in the field. And that's when I got that was my first stint at Howard. I actually was there twice.
Right. So at Howard, historic HBCU, were you is this where you shifted into manuscripts?
Yes.
For the first time? Okay.
Yes.
Well, how did that prepare you? Now that we're looking back several years later, how did that prepare you for your future career at the house?
It was wonderful preparation for that, because I hadn't had experience with working with donors and deeds of gift and those sorts, and restrictions and those sorts of things. There was a curator who was my boss,
right.
Joellen Elbashir, and she was really the person that dealt one-on-one. But certainly she was a wonderful, another wonderful mentor who helped me learn about those sorts of things.
Now you did work for a time at a company that's very well known to everybody in the archival field, History Associates. What convinced you to want to step into the private sector a little bit? And although it's a private sector company, it works a lot with government institutions and government bodies. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, when I went to work for them, I had only been at Howard for about a year and a half, but they were getting ready to have a bunch of layoffs. And I was newer, so I was worried.
Doing the math.
Yeah. So that's why I left. I didn't want to. I really liked it there.
I see.
And History Associates was hiring a lot of people to work on a Department of Energy, a big Department of Energy contract, where there were 2 teams that went down to different nuclear facilities and inventoried their records.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and not the team I was on. One of the teams also dealt with some human experimentation that had been done way back. That was not a good thing. Luckily, that wasn't the one I worked on. So I went to, I think it was Savannah River, to that facility, and also, we went to Georgia, to the National Archives facility there because of the records from DOE that were there. And where else did we go? I think that was pretty much it.
It was like Savannah River, Oak Ridge. Those are
Oak Ridge, yes.
Oak Ridge,
I'm
Tennessee.
sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the big ones. Oh, at least this side of the Mississippi River. Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
But eventually, you got back to Howard University and back to manuscripts as assistant curator.
Yes.
And just to bring it up to sort of the meat of our conversation here, tell me about how you learned that the House of Representatives was hiring in its archival team.
Well, amusingly so, it was in the Washington Post. They advertised. It wasn't, it wasn't through Society of American Archivists. It wasn't through any of those channels. It was kind of odd, and I thought, okay. Well, I've always been interested in politics, so that's how I applied. Yeah, and yeah.
So, when you applied, what made you want to apply for something in politics and government? Was it about politics, or was it just the nature of the work? What made you want to apply?
Well, I'd always been interested in politics. My father actually had, after he left the military, had been a lobbyist. Oh. So a little bit of, exposure to that.
Sure.
But I thought it would be very exciting and interesting, and I also wanted to get back into government service to make a career of it.
Sure.
So yeah.
Well, tell me, what was the application process like? What was the interview process like for that kind of a role?
Well, I had 4 interviews before I was hired.
4 interviews?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think what happened, I found out later, was that I'd had 2, and they had offered the job to someone else who decided not to take it. So then they advertised again, and so actually I was mad because nobody had ever really followed up and said, we're done. So I just kind of, I think, applied out of spite. And had 2 more interviews, and then got the job. So that was kind of an interesting journey.
So you get your job. What was your job title, and what were your initial job duties?
Well, my initial job title was archival specialist.
Okay.
And it was, this was in the office of the clerk.
Right.
After the transition of the House Historian's office, the clerk created an office to deal with official House records and history, but it was called Historical Services. It was a sub-department of the Legislative Resource Center, which was under the office of the clerk. Okay. So it was, at that time there was just 4 of us total. Okay. It was a very small.
Was Cynthia Peace-Miller, was she the archivist at this time, or had she already left?
She'd already left. Okay. She was with Senator Moynihan's office, I believe.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, do you remember who was the archivist at the time?
There was no archivist.
Okay.
It was the Legislative Resource Center was taking over those responsibilities, right, mainly with working with the official records of the House.
Okay.
And then I think, Ken Cotto was my boss initially there. And so I think he was maybe doing some interviews with members, but I think to a certain extent after Cynthia maybe left and there was that part of the job had kind of been stagnant for a little while.
Okay. So you come in, you start January 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what were your what was sort of your fiefdom? What was your main task as a specialist in those early days?
Yeah, well, it was mainly working with the committees, learning the process for them archiving their records.
Okay, so you work primarily with committees and getting the committee records to the Center for Legislative Archives?
Yes.
Okay, so you were the conduit, so to speak,
yes.
to get was Mike Gillette still the head of, or would it have been?
He was there for a little
Richard.
while. Richard was there, but as number
Mike's
2.
Deputy. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so, Mike wasn't there for that long before Richard took over.
Okay. Well, so 2001, after September 11th, there were several anthrax scares at the Capitol.
Yes.
And I know from my many conversations with Karen Paul, that was a tremendous upsetting event, just turned their lives upside down, having to leave the Hart Building. Or did it affect the House as well, and your work as well?
A little bit. I think for a while we were working from home, or just a little bit. It wasn't as bad as what she went through with the Hart Building. I think there were some scares when I was there. There were crushed breathmen on the ground. Oh my God, it's anthrax. But it wasn't too bad.
Okay. So, when the Office of History and Preservation was finally established in 2002-ish, did that change your day-to-day workflows or tasks, or was that were you already doing that work just under a different name in a different office?
It did kind of change because before, when we were under the Legislative Resource Center, there was a buffer, who the chief of the LRC was who we had to go through, or who Ken had to go through.
Right.
So this was a more direct line to the clerk.
Okay.
And I think it was probably easier communications and easier to get things done.
How much of a maybe disruption is not the right word, but how much did things change when a new clerk came in?
Yeah, it varied because some clerks were very involved in what we did and others weren't so much. So, Jeff Trandle was the first clerk I worked under. He was very involved. Because he really was the one that created our group to try and reestablish a history function and take care of the archival function.
Right.
And then he also included the curatorial function, which is later on. That's when we get Fair Ellett as curator. But in different ways. I will say probably Karen Haas was one of our biggest supporters as clerk, and both her stints as clerk, and she really was very, very supportive and wonderful. And Lorraine Miller was supportive as well, but just it was just different.
How could a clerk support the kind of work you were doing? How did that support manifest itself?
Well, I think in terms of maybe outreach, I know that Lorraine Miller was very wanting us to do outreach with members. In fact, she was the one who really got House Concurrent Resolution 307 through. So.
That was 2008, 7?
Do I have the date here? I don't have the date. Yeah, I believe so.
That feels right.
Yeah.
That feels right.
Yeah. And in terms of another project that we were kind of trying to work on was with the House, at least. I don't think so much with the Senate, but with the House, we would mainly really just be dealing with the majorities in the committees, because they were the ones who were kind of in charge of signing off on
Sure.
what records went. But because the minority also has their own projects, a lot of times they would have records, but they wouldn't be archived. And so, felt like that was kind of a missing chunk.
Yeah.
And so, in some ways, some clerks were supportive of that, some others weren't, because it's a different party, and so they felt like it wasn't really their place to.
Interesting. So you mentioned about working with the committees, obviously. At what point or did your office or you start reaching out to individual members about the dispensation or preservation of their personal records?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was that during freshman orientation, was that during closing, how to close an office
Mm-hmm.
if that was something you did.
Yeah.
So when did that come about?
Well, that came about probably, maybe not the first couple of years, but after that. And the focus was members that were leaving. I think there was a big fear that if we approached members when they hadn't announced they were leaving, that maybe it would be setting off.
We still worry about that. It's like we're the Grim Reaper or something.
Absolutely. So it was mainly for closing, and in fact, we still were using Cynthia's manual that she had come up with, closing a congressional office, and so that was always very interesting. So it really was the members that were leaving, and then as time went on, it would be members that were long serving that we would try and get in contact with.
Right.
And members that, and then the new members came along, but that was later.
Did you notice perhaps an uptick in interest in preservation or donating of papers before and after the concurrent resolution?
I think there was a little bit of a positive one,
Mm-hmm.
because it was nice when we go to meet with members, we would give them a copy, and that sometimes would have an effect. And even in the manuals, I think the current manuals,
right.
It's printed in the manual. So I don't know now that it's been a few years whether it has that effect or not, but I think initially it really did.
So how did your job change when you went from archival specialist to archivist? Was that something
Mm-hmm.
that changed your sort of scope and job responsibilities, or was this just sort of a change in title?
Well, I became a supervisor then.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I started out with one archival technician that worked for me, and then it grew to 2 people. So that was the main.
Okay. Well, how much did the House and Senate don't always talk to each other or even like to work with each other, but how much did you work with your counterparts in the Senate Historical Office, Karen Paul,
Mm-hmm.
Don Ritchie, Dick Baker? How much did you collaborate with them?
It was mainly with Karen,
Sure.
and it was mainly over Society, the Congressional Papers Roundtable, Society of American Archivists, and then when the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress was created.
So that's really interesting that most of your collaboration took place in these professional associations and not in your, down the block.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is interesting to think that's how it how that worked out. Well, I don't want to give you, PTSD or anything, but tell me about creating the biographical directory
Oh,
of the United States Congress.
yeah. Well, that had already been. It was online, newly online, I think, for a few years by the time I got there.
Such as it was in 2001.
Yes, yeah. So, but definitely one of my jobs was to find the congressional collections and put them in. I like doing it.
Well, what did that entail? Because that sounds both fun and extremely aggravating.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a good way to describe it. I had some access to some databases that I could use that helped with that. I know there was a lot of research that had been done. I think Cynthia had done where they had sent questionnaires out to different repositories asking if they had collections, and some of that hadn't been entered in, so that was another good place to capture it. And then just a lot of times just getting in touch with different repositories, by the way, I'm trying to find the papers of former Congressman such and such. Do you happen to know where they are?
Was there a method to the madness? Did you start alphabetically or by state? What was the Yeah.
I think I started alphabetically, yeah.
Why not? As good a way as any, I suppose.
And I think also in terms of dates, in terms of how long members have been gone,
right,
as well.
Okay. Well, you had mentioned the manual a little bit earlier, but the House Records Management Manual for members, was that newly created in 2005 or 6, or was that something that was already there but was updated?
It was newly created because it was basically taking the focus away from the closing to more day-to-day. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How to do this from day one instead of throwing it all in a box.
Well, and that was always one of the big complaints we get when we meet with offices. They're like, why are we just hearing about this now when we're leaving? Which is absolutely a valid point.
Absolutely. So, what role did the House play or your office play in the creation of the Congressional Visitor Center, the CVC? Was that something that your office did, or was that more, I guess, the House historian at the time, which came back in 2005?
I believe
it was Robert Remini.
Yes, yeah. That was an interesting time.
Well, tell the late Professor Remini. Tell me about the reestablishment of the House historian, because your office had been functioning pretty much nonstop since its creation. The House historian's office from 83 to 95, and then laying dormant after Ray Smock's ouster, I suppose.
Right.
And so that would have been from 95. So a decade, there was no House historian. So tell me about that process of how you found out there was going to be a House historian and how your offices worked together, I guess.
Well, that's very interesting. Well, by the time that happened, our office really had been doing the historical function as well as the archival and then the curatorial function.
Right.
So it was kind of awkward. It was even more awkward when they physically put the office in the basement of Cannon right next to our office. So literally, for the staff, Dr. Remini, I think, had a ceremonial office, and he lived in, I think, Illinois.
I think he was from Chicago. He was University of Chicago.
Yeah.
I think.
So he really didn't. He was working out of Chicago, so it wasn't. It was really 3 other staff that worked in that office, and we really did not work together. It was probably a little bit tense.
Interesting. Was the feeling mutual, or was it just?
I think on their part, the feeling was they wanted to know what we did so that they could maybe do it better.
Well, did it ever get better?
After the office was no longer, it did. Or when I probably shouldn't say that.
No,
anyway,
no.
when Matt Wisniewski became historian, because
So 2010.
Yeah, absolutely, because
And he's still
Yeah.
the house historian. Yeah.
Absolutely. He's a good friend, and
So that's when it got better.
yes, it was. And he had been doing it. He knew the history. He had his PhD. He checked all the boxes. So
Did the offices get integrated at that point, or what?
they did.
Okay.
They did. There were 3 staff, I think, and one of them really kind of stayed with the newly created office. And it was interesting because I don't know if you know for the historian's office. Matt is under the speaker, but the actual staff is under the clerk.
That's right. Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm more of a Senate person just because of the papers and the experience that I've had. But talking to Ray and figuring out like all these different how and why it was created, and you served the speaker's office, and which was great when you had a champion in the speaker's office, but not so great when you didn't have a champion. But things seem to have gotten better, at least
Oh, absolutely.
in that regard.
Yes.
Others may disagree on other fronts, but so right around, we're taking a step back, but I think it was in 01 or 02 when the CHARM group, the Capitol Hill Archivist and Records Management Group, was created. Well, tell me about it, because this is sort of it's a professional network, but I guess it was trying to bring together or sort of replicate those professional networks inside Capitol Hill.
Yeah, it was really more of a Senate thing.
It was more of a Senate thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So misleadingly named.
Yeah. Well, and Karen there were archivists on all the committees, and they're even on with certain senators. So it was more. I think I went to a few meetings, but it really was.
No,
more.
that's good to know. That's really interesting. So, when did you? I presume you weren't active in CPR or the Congressional Papers Roundtable before joining the House of Representatives, were you?
No, I wasn't actually. I was active in SAA and
Sure.
with Howard, the African American Roundtable. I was active with, but yeah.
So tell me about your introduction to CPR, which was probably even then one of the larger groups within SAA.
Well, it was kind of interesting because when I came on board, Cynthia Miller was the president.
Oh, well, there you go.
And so it was, it was different because I think a lot of people thought that I don't know, it wasn't the easiest transition, because there were people that I think were very upset that Cynthia was no longer with the House, and there have been a letter even, I think, that is public, that was written to Jeff Trandle, and very upset that Cynthia wasn't with the clerk's office. So
it would be one of those things that not necessarily directed at you, but because of the context in which you. Well, did it ever get better?
Yes, it did. It got much better. Yes.
Well, that's good. Well, tell me, and I think you've already touched on it a bit. Talking about getting to know Karen and those on the Senate side, but what role did CPR and SAA play in sort of your professional development, but also sort of maybe the professionalization of archives in the House or on Capitol Hill?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because it was nice to, a lot of times I would get contacted by different colleges and universities that were interested in pursuing a member and that sort of thing, and I would try to be as helpful as I could and provide them our manuals, our stuff, and would a lot of times, I had to be careful because I didn't know a lot of times if they had made a decision where their
Right.
papers were going, but I would try to connect staff also with whatever repository was interested.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you? I think I've seen old newsletters and stuff where you were the one that either created the newsletter, or you're the one that kept the communications. And
I was the webmaster.
you were the web. I was like, why do we? Because I remember when I first got into archives and I would read these newsletters and stuff. It was your name was plastered all over. I was like, oh, she must have been somebody really important.
No. I was the webmaster for a while when I can't remember who was doing it, and so no, I was I was not that important.
God, those websites go down, you become the most important person. Well, tell me about one of the chief milestones, and one of the main reasons that I'm here and we're doing this project is the creation of ACSC, the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress. We can go back and forth on whether what the origins were in 2001, but everybody thinks that 2003 there's a meeting at Shepherd University over in West Virginia, where the Bird Center is, Ray Smock's Institute. Were you at that first sort of, I guess, founding meeting?
I was.
Tell me about it, because I went back and I looked at the folks who came, and it wasn't just people from centers and libraries, but it was also political scientists, some historians. So what was the sort of the vision for what ACSC was going to be or could be for our discipline and for documentation of Congress?
Yeah, I don't know that I really recognized what it was going to be at the time. I think Ken and Cotto and I went together, and he, I think, was very aware of what they wanted to accomplish. I certainly was interested that this was going to be historians as well as archivists, and the political scientists was an interesting facet as well. But I don't know that I ever predicted it would become as big an organization and stick around as long as it has. So
why do you think that there was a need for a separate organization rather than working through CPR as it's CPS now, the Congressional Papers Section? Why the need or desire for a separate organization?
Well, I think it was because it would be more attractive to folks on the historical side, because they're not necessarily archivists, so I think they felt that CPS was archival. It really was, and so they just felt like probably that it wouldn't fit what they were doing.
That's for librarians, that's for archivists.
Right.
This is as I stick my hand in front of the camera, like a true professional. Well, tell me about those formative years and how the organization, the association, sought to work with. I talked to Karen about how it worked with the Senate. How did the House, your office, try and work with ACSC in those early days?
Well, I think we viewed it as a good way to do outreach for members. Use that. I know Glenn Browder, I think, was an early member, and so that was an interesting combination of being a former member and also being working at least on his own paper collection that he had. A lot of the focus was more not archival, and so that was interesting in that, especially like with the political scientists, that was very interesting. And I think that just in terms of, I'm rambling here, sorry. Just bringing together the historical aspect. A lot of times topics of the conference would be somebody coming out with a new book, and so that was interesting. It was really great because early on we decided it would be great to have former members talk to the group to get that background. And there was one conference that I was happy to get some former female members, which was even better. And that worked with Matt Wisniewski and the kind of the Women in Congress book that his group had done. Yeah.
Right. Well, thinking about it, from those early years, and the formation of Congress Week and stuff. What do you think ACSC has done well, and what are some areas where perhaps it's fallen short or could probably do better in the future?
Well, I think they've done very well with the conferences and bringing people together in that respect, and having them at different repository, or centers, I should say. I think that I know that education was always kind of seen as a possibility, working with schools and stuff, and I know that they're doing that through a lot of the materials that they've done. I think I don't know. I guess the other part is there's always so much confusion about people that are either belonging to CPS and to ACSC or to both. There's always been that confusion. And
and what I've seen is there are, I should preface this by saying, if this is my take, there do seem to be the folks who see it more as an organization for repositories and centers broadly defined, and others who see it as those repositories, but also bringing to be the practitioners and those who use our records, or the records that we hold, not our records necessarily, and that there is some resistance, or not conflict, but it doesn't seem like that there's agreement in who necessarily the association is supposed to serve sometimes.
Yes.
That's my take.
Yeah.
And obviously not as somebody who's been there 20 years, but as somebody who's been there 5 or 6 years. That's something that I've noticed is sort of not an identity crisis, but we're still deciding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, looking back, that was an issue. It's kind of like, well, if a conference is going to have topics about these repositories and their papers, that's kind of duplicating what CPS is doing. We really need to make sure that if you're going to do that the historical functions are brought in as well. But I think that there have been some really great conferences, though, where that's been the focus, is trying to have kind of a center of where it is and bring everybody together.
Right. Well, co-signed on that front. Well, here it is, the House Concurrent Resolution 307, 2008.
Okay.
So what did, you mentioned this before, but what was your role in that resolution, and then what did it mean for your office? I know Karen was over the moon when this resolution finally passed. But tell me about that process.
Sure. Well, to be totally honest, Karen was really the one that created it, the mover and the shaker, but was having trouble with leadership getting on board. I think whoever the Secretary of the Senate was at the time, it just there were more restrictions on who they could go to about it. So, so I give her total credit, but she really was the one that came up with it. Well, I was just lucky that at the time Lorraine Miller was the clerk, and we went to her and said, this is something that is of interest, and she just took it and ran with it. She just took it and went right to leadership and got them to sign off on it. So that it was just very much luck on that.
Right.
I think being able to communicate that this really is important because because we were having trouble with some members retaining their collections and giving them to repositories. And something like this at least would have some kind of meat.
Right. Why do you think it took until 2008 for the House, Congress, to finally go on the record saying, oh, right, maybe we should do this?
Well, I think it's that I think they didn't like being told what to do, to be honest. It's interesting when you see presidential papers.
That's what I was about. The Presidential Records Act had been there since 1974 for obvious reasons. And we don't have to discuss the context in which that was created.
Right.
But yeah, that was 1974, and here it is in 2000, and this is non-binding.
Right.
So
right.
the only records of Congress that are preserved by NARA are those committee records, not the personal papers.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very odd. I think a lot of times maybe members are worried that something's going to come back to haunt them. That's why we always try to say, you have control in your deed of gift. You can say, when I die, or this period of time, and that sort of thing. But it seemed like there was concern. There was always concern, even with actually the official records, that certain communications or unpublished things were going to come back to haunt them. Now, with the House, official records are closed for 30 years, a minimum of 30 years, which is different from the Senate.
Yes.
And then 50 years if they deal with kind of investigative records, those sorts of things. So there's that buffer, which I think we try to emphasize would be helpful. And said, because of this with the official records, you can do something similar with your records.
Right.
And that helps somewhat. But yeah, some members just were very nervous about, I don't know, something coming back to haunt them.
Yeah, and I think there, in my experience is every member is unique, and every member, every donor, really, it's not just members. Their concerns are unique, and I'll say the most common thing we hear is that nobody cares about these things. Yes,
exactly.
We go to great lengths to disabuse donors and potential donors of that because, frankly, we don't know how. We do know how researchers in the past have used records, but we have no idea how the next generation of historians, political scientists, theater majors are going to use archival records. So
absolutely,
we just never know, and they never know. So always better to donate those records than to not.
And a lot of times, and I know my colleagues that are still there, we would take a copy of a finding aid for somebody in their state or somebody that they would be familiar with, and say, this is a finding aid, and this is what it looks like, and these are the types of researchers that are interested in them, and that sometimes would help.
Did you ever coordinate with, because with CPS there's archivists on the Hill, SAA sometimes. Did you ever coordinate with repositories and archivists from members' home states or places like that?
Yeah.
when we would come up or when they would go up to the Hill to meet with members, staff?
Yeah, usually there was they called it well, at the time it was the round table, so it was a CPR day that always would happen before the conference.
Right.
Wherever the conference was taking place. And so we'd have a program usually and have somebody speak about different topics. And then if it was in a different location, usually that involved going. I know the Russell Library has hosted and gotten to also talk about different collections and have different speakers. So so that was always something to look forward to, because usually we have a lunch or a dinner or something too where it was more informal, getting to know the different archivists.
Do you ever think we'll get to a point where the records of Congress are appreciated and preserved to the level that presidential records are?
I would hope so. But to be honest, I think public opinion is that they don't know that they're not necessarily. I think people would be very, very confused if you told them that members of Congress do not have to archive their records.
Right.
Absolutely. And like I said, in terms of what happens with Presidential Records Act and presidential records, it's kind of crazy. Other problems that we would have, at least with the official records, is a lot of times if a member was a committee chair, a lot of times their official committee records would end up in their personal papers.
That does happen from time to time.
Yes.
So tell me the process of repatriating these records to their proper home, the Center for Legislative Archives. Would it usually? I won't name any names, but I know that when we accession, members' collections, you go through and you say, these appear to be committee records. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Call the House Archivist and say, what should we do with these?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's happened a lot. And so we would basically be, again, the conduit between the archives and the repository to find out if these were original and there was no copy at the center. Or a lot of times it would just be copies, and so we would ask the repository to separate that series and have it closed for the same amount of time at the center.
So it matches up.
Absolutely, and most of the time that wasn't a problem. Mm-hmm. I think in one case there were some Watergate records that ended up in somebody's papers, and they were very cooperative, but we had to take them.
Senator Russell Cheryl had to send back some of the Warren Commission records that had come with the senator when he died in 71, so that when they were processing it, and I guess that collection finally opened in 78. Mm-hmm. So these things happen. Classified records too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Something that. But I think that's something that the general public, doesn't really know, is that classified records, setting aside the argument of overclassification or not, it is what it is, and classified records appear in collections all the time, and there are protocols and there's a process for getting all this back to where it belongs.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know a major congressional research center or repository who hasn't come. I was like, whoops.
And they don't. Most of them are very cooperative, and they don't want to have to deal with them or house them. But there've been a couple. I can't think of exactly who, but there have been a couple of cases where we had some trouble getting those, and it really was, again, being a conduit and working with National Archives, because they're the ones that would go get them and bring them back.
As we know, and the public learns from news reports and now a federal criminal case. So it's interesting when the work that we do, which is so much behind the scenes, low key, and it usually happens during presidential elections when there are papers somewhere. Our colleagues at the University of Delaware are deal with it with Senator Biden, President Biden's Senate papers being there, and whenever there's a running mate or somebody that or the call, you get the inevitable calls from reporters of, do you have things from this person? It's like, maybe you'll have to come look. I think the political reporters and sometimes the general public think we have item level description of things.
Yeah.
And we're if only that were so, but we just don't. Same thing about, is this digitized? And it's like, oh yeah. Or you go down to the vault and it's like, how much of this is digitized? Like, I don't know, the equivalent of 5 bankers boxes out of 200,000. It's time and money.
Oh yeah.
Time and money.
We even had one case where there were a couple of Nixon letters related to Watergate that ended up a manuscript dealer was trying to sell.
Oh.
And so we tracked them back to where what happened was the repository where the collection of papers were for the member of Congress. Somebody had switched out Xeroxes for originals. And,
unfortunately, that's why people are, man, why is security so tight?
Yep.
That would be. There's several I've never heard of that. I'd never heard about that case, but lots of people, razor blading maps out of rare books and all sorts of stuff. But that's why provenance is important. And with the internet, it makes it both easier to sell, but also easier to track, I suppose.
Yes, that's the good thing. Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword. Well, tell me about how you took your life and career from archives and have put it to use in your current career, helping archivists like me transcribe. What'll be a really meta experience for you is when you transcribe your own interview.
Oh, absolutely.
That'll be a new one.
And then I can complain. Why does she keep saying that or doing that?
She keeps touching the microphone.
Absolutely. Aw. Well, I retired sooner than I was going to.
Okay.
In 2019 because my husband got sick. He was diagnosed in 2018 with glioblastoma. And so the plan, he had retired in 2015. The plan was I would retire in 2021. I had the government service years, but I didn't have the health insurance years because we had been on his health insurance, and you need to be on it for 5 years with the government to take it with you. So when he got sick, I just knew I had to retire. I knew that this wasn't going to be a long term. This wasn't going to be beatable. So I retired in 2019. I was able to get a waiver. The government was very kind to me. Gave me a waiver so that I could take my health insurance with me. So we went through that with him, with lots of chemo, lots of radiation, lots of all kinds of stuff, and he ultimately passed away in October 2020. And so, I didn't, at the time, we were smack dab in the middle of COVID. I knew that I wanted to do something. I didn't really want to go back to work as an archivist, and I really didn't want to do something where I had to go anywhere because of COVID.
Right.
So I'd always been interested in transcription. So I took a class online, a transcription class. My teacher's wonderful. She actually, her specialty is, her business is transcribing sermons for churches.
Yeah.
She has quite a big company and has a lot of people working for her and stuff, but she does this online course. And so I thought, well, let me try it out and see if I like it. And I really liked it. So then that's when I started deciding that and that was always her goal as a teacher was, She says, I don't want you all to work for companies that are going to take advantage of you and not pay you what you should be getting. I encourage people to start their own companies. So that's what kind of...
Which you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I've always been fascinated by, because especially with the advent of so much technology, and I won't name names of companies or anything like that, but people just assume that the computers can do it for you, or the programs can do it for you.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a layer to that, especially with AI and machine learning platforms. But how do you make that computer learning software work, and how much human involvement has to be there?
I think there really has to be human involvement, because from my experience of what I've looked at, you use AI or whatever to transcribe something, you have to go and clean it up, and it's actually, I think it's harder to do that than to actually
to do it right the first time.
Right the first time. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, if you watch the automatically generated closed caption for like YouTube videos.
Yes.
And you're like, or if you do interviews with folks who have really thick Southern accents, like I do sometimes. I've gotten transcripts, or I've seen transcripts where, for example, Senator Paul Coverdale is discussed, and you get the transcript back and it's Coverdale. Everywhere Coverdale, because that's how lots of folks say Paul Coverdale's name.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
So that's something, which is why auditing is always really important when it comes to transcripts.
Oh,
so,
absolutely, absolutely.
But it's a process, and what, because we do this interview, for example, you approve it, we throw it up on YouTube. What's the value of transcripts?
I think it's a big value, especially for people doing historical research. It's a lot of times a lot easier to. I mean, certainly it's nice to listen to an interview, but
sure.
to actually use it in your research, it's so much easier to be able to cite something and that sort of thing. I think too for the interviewee, it's nice because they can see it in that sort of format as well, and be able to see how it's going to be used.
Right. Well, and we also, at the Russell Library, we see it, as an accessibility issue for deaf and hard of hearing, and folks who process slower. Then it's easier to sometimes hit Control F, and find the area rather than trying to scrub through. Even when the interviews are indexed, it's sort of a both and proposition with us. Once you have the transcript, you can have the index with relative ease. So you're enjoying your current career, and
I am. I really like it. I've been working with this is the second year now, and I guess we're going into the third year. Really,
I think it's third. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the third year. I'm sorry.
Time flies. Time flies.
Yeah, but it's really great. Working with you guys has been wonderful.
That's right.
And actually, I went to the Oral History Association conference a few weeks ago as a vendor and set up. And I was very fortunate. I was right next to Audio Transcription Services, and we became fast friends.
Well, there you go.
It really was very nice to get to know other transcriptionists. And
no, I didn't get to OHA this year. I'm hoping to go to the Cincinnati one next year.
Yeah.
I think it's in Cincinnati.
It is.
That feels right.
Yep.
So I'll probably see you there. And ACSC is going to be here in the spring. Not here at Denton's, but here in DC.
In DC? Oh,
so
okay.
I'll keep you posted.
Oh, that'll be great. Thank you.
Get the gang back together. Well, and we might have a panel about this project that we're doing. So,
That's wonderful.
We shall see. Well, anything else you'd like to record before we head out into the fresh darkness of Washington, D.C.?
Oh, that's right. I will say I had very, very happy memories working for the House, and I'm still very close to the people there, and have lunch every every other month, something like that. And they are fantastic and do fantastic work. And my Heather Burke, who is taken over, she is always a wonderful colleague. And they're doing good work and wonderful work, and I just want to sing their praises. That's all.
That's doing great work during unprecedented times in politics.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you so much, Robin, for taking the time out to taking this walk down memory lane and participating in our Documenting Congress Oral History Project. On behalf of everybody at the Russell Library, we really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.